On October 7th, following the belligerently barbaric attacks by Palestinian terrorists that killed over 1,000 people in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared war on Hamas. A few days later, and at least 2 weeks before Israel's ground entry into Gaza, the Israel Defense Forces, on their Twitter account, declared another war on Hamas, the war of information, an ever-changing and filthy game of propaganda that, from the Palestinians' standpoint, is designed to cause devastating damages and effects on public opinion. After all, we're dealing with the most cruel and evil types of terrorists here, so you should absolutely expect devastating damages and effects from all angles, not only on the so-called battlefield. Anti-Jewish propaganda is, of course, just another day in Jewish history. We've witnessed it for centuries, a disgusting scourge that finds a way to reopen time and again. But when it comes to the Palestinians and their Muslim partners, we're not just talking about another day in Jewish history. We're talking about some of the most virulent anti-Jewish propaganda you could imagine. Across the Muslim world, antisemitism is different than in non-religious countries. It's used as some crazed, abstract system for making sense of a broken world that doesn't subscribe to their fundamentalist Muslim ideals. Fundamentalist Muslims don't just oppose Israel. They've called the Jewish state things like a sinister, unclean, rabid dog of the region, whose leaders look like beasts and cannot be called human. In Gaza, Muslim preachers regularly spew nauseating anti-Semitism, such as one who said, "Our doctrine in fighting the Jews is that we will totally exterminate them. We will not leave a single one of them alive, because they are alien usurpers of the land and eternal mercenaries." This sort of anti-Semitism thrives where there aren't any Jews. Not a person, but an idea. The Jew is a unique carrier of transcendent evil. A pollution, a stain, a dark force responsible for the failures of others, the unconscious shame and primeval urges they feel in themselves, and everything that needs explaining, according to famed U.S. columnist David Brooks. This is a form of derangement, a flight from reality even in otherwise sophisticated people. In the Palestinian territories, such propaganda is indoctrinated in children from very young ages, as they are taught the supreme value and various methods of killing Jews. In United Nations schools, mosques, and other government-sanctioned venues, they learn to glorify hatred and nurture violence. In summer camps, they teach kids how to fire automatic weapons and kidnap Israelis. If you think this isn't ludicrous enough, both Palestinian governments, Hamas in Gaza, and the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank, literally incentivize terrorism against Israelis. That's right. If you commit a terror attack against Israelis and are jailed for it in Israel, you'll receive a monthly salary from one of these Palestinian governments, and your family will also receive monthly stipends. Hamas and its co-conspirators in the Muslim world had been vilifying Jews for decades, starting with their founding charter, which is full of anti-Semitic bile, according to a Time magazine expose about the hate that drove the Palestinians' October 7th attacks. They constructed an entire architecture of anti-Semitism that spanned the world and spanned spheres from academia to religion, politics, and culture. There were many people who should have been pushing for a just resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but instead had adopted an ideology of hate that did not see Jews as worthy of a piece of land or even as equal contestants in a historical struggle. It saw them as subhuman. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, Hitler's Mein Kampf, and other timeless hateful publications are translated into Arabic and updated with new additions, to the point that a healthy majority of the public is thoroughly convinced Zionists are pure filth who ought to be unsoiled from Palestine. But it doesn't end in the Palestinian territories. We know virulent anti-Jewish propaganda exists within a variety of social institutions across Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, and other Arab and Muslim majority states. Certainly, this is nothing new to Israelis. We've seen this game played many times before, and we knew it was only a matter of hours after the bloodiest day in Israeli history, October 7th, that the Palestinians and their Arab and Muslim partners, as well as Russia, would unleash their virulent anti-Jewish propaganda, disguised as anti-Israel, across the world. Why limit the battle with Israel to military confines when they could simply pull a lever that is the easily swayed and inherently anti-Semitic court of worldwide public opinion? Is this not by far the most lethal weapon in their arsenal? Mind you, these are the same Palestinians who didn't even try to cover up their October 7th mischief, but instead decided to record it on body cams and disseminate the footage on social media. They even reportedly invited photographers from the Associated Press, New York Times, and CNN to photograph these atrocities in real time, so these photojournalists could send their footage to these outlets in the form of news media. Michael Oren, a former Israeli ambassador to the United States who's worked on issues in Gaza, said of the Palestinians' abhorrently unapologetic and celebratory antisemitism, "There is ritual to it, bloodlust, and theater. In contrast to the Nazis, who understood that the Holocaust was stressful work for its perpetrators and that images of its conduct might shock even the most Jew-hating Germans, Hamas and other jihadist groups enjoy their job and assume that a great many others will applaud them. The Nazis sought to hide the evidence of their genocide," Oren added. Hamas posted it on Facebook and Telegram. It's difficult to imagine the citizens of Dresden, say, handing out candy and setting off fireworks after the liquidation of the Lodz ghetto in 1944. Not so the Palestinians, after virtually every major terrorist attack, their celebrations reaching a frenzy on October 7th. Hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, followed Hamas terrorists through the breaks in Israel's fence and carried out atrocities no less horrific. And it doesn't end with their belligerently barbaric attacks on innocent Israelis. They seek opportunity after opportunity to defecate the existence of Israel, and by extension the Jews, with some of the purest lies, fabrications, and deceit. I'm not talking about sinister forms of media that overtly encourage people to distrust Jews, overemphasize so-called Jewish bodily features, or portend that we so cleverly control the world. Sure, those are other unfortunate versions of anti-Jewish propaganda, but compared to the Palestinians' tactics, they make the Nazis look, at worst, like a perturbed friend of the Jews. Take, for example, when Palestinian authorities reported on October 17th, 10 days after the fighting began, that Israel attacked a hospital, allegedly killing some 500 people. Within minutes, thousands of notable media outlets, many Arab and Muslim-majority countries, organizations like the anti-Semitic United Nations and others, politicians, political puppets, thought leaders, and influencers took this Palestinian propaganda and ran with it to the moon and back. 1,402 times. In Israel, even as the Israel Defense Forces immediately announced it was conducting an investigation, we recognized this all-too-familiar way of doing business. For years, Palestinian terrorists have been killing their own people, either purposely, accidentally, or a combination of both, and then manipulate these tragedies into an anti-Israel, anti-Jewish libel. And oh, what a libel this was. An Islamic Jihad missile has killed many Palestinians at a Gazan hospital, a place where lives should be saved. Isaac Herzog, the Israeli president, tweeted, "Shame on the media who swallow the lies of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, broadcasting a 21st century blood libel around the globe. Shame on the vile terrorists in Gaza who willfully spill the blood of the innocent." Some days later, howls of outrage swept across the news media and social media after the Israeli military struck an ambulance in Gaza, since it was being used in that moment by Hamas terrorists to transfer weapons. Instead of condemning the Palestinians for turning every single humanitarian asset into a tool of war, as author Aviva Klampas put it, the news media and social media quickly scolded the Israelis for doing what Israel has told everyone, from day one of this war, what it was planning to do, and what the United States and many other countries have openly supported, freeing the Gaza Strip of Hamas, an unthinkably dangerous Islamic jihadist organization. To understand this inexplicable insanity, you have to understand that the Palestinians and their partners are playing a much different and much more effective game than the Nazis and other historical Jew haters. Whereas the Nazis, for example, tried to create a subhuman and untrustworthy image of Jews in German society and eventually across Europe, the Palestinians and their partners want to fight the Jews because they know that much of the world will remain silent, ambivalent, and apathetic to these wars. Take, for example, all the university administrators who have either said nothing, or nothing meaningful, about the Palestinian attack on Israel, on Jews mostly, and the blatant antisemitism, both in rhetoric and in action, that has subsequently erupted on their campuses. Why is that? Are all these highly distinguished academic administrators also on the anti-Semitic spectrum, ranging from passive and complicit to violent and lethal? Or is there something else going on here? According to a study published in 2022 by the National Association of Academics in the United States, a study that did not attract much attention at the time, the Qataris donated $4.7 billion to U.S. universities starting in 2001, precisely after the September 11th attacks. The recipients, however, did not report part of the money received as required by law. In fact, Qatar, whose allies include Iran, Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, North Korea, and China, has become the largest foreign donor to American academia in the 2 decades since 9/11. This includes Cornell, an Ivy League school, Georgetown, Northwestern, and Carnegie Mellon, all considered among the most prestigious U.S. universities. In another report comprising 4 separate studies, at least 200 American colleges and universities illegally withheld information on approximately $13 billion in undisclosed contributions from foreign regimes, many of which are authoritarian. What's been transpiring on the campuses of these universities and others since the war's outbreak is a multi-participant, multifaceted strategy that is now coming to fruition at the so-called right moment, immediately after the Palestinian massacre and abduction in Israel on October 7th. Some of the incidents that happened in the United States over the last few weeks confirm this murky reality, such as at Amherst University in Massachusetts, where 57 anti-Israel students were arrested after rioting and taking over the administration building. At Tulane University in New Orleans, arrests were made following a fight that broke out between Jewish students and a pro-Palestinian group. The fight began after pro-Palestinian demonstrators who were traveling in a truck, reminiscent of the ones used by Palestinian terrorists who invaded Israel, began not just waving the Palestinian flag, but burning the Israeli one. At New York City's small private college, Cooper Union, the administration locked Jewish students in its library to protect them from an angry mob of pro-Palestinian protesters who were banging on the doors and windows after they burst through the campus security guards. At George Washington University, one of the students projected anti-Semitic messages on the library wall: "Free Palestine from the river to the sea, and glory to our martyrs." In the weeks since the October 7th attacks by Hamas in Israel, more Jewish and Israeli students across the United States have said that they fear for their safety in the face of the culture of anti-Semitic demonstrations and events, which are becoming increasingly violent. These demonstrations and events have gone well beyond the boundaries of the progressive concept that flourishes on campuses. Historically, universities are homes to free speech and critical thinking, but the speed with which the demonstrations are organized, and the availability of resources for them, raise questions like those that arose in recent days in London, where demonstrations feature huge quantities of Palestinian flags that were quickly distributed to thousands of participants. Without realizing it, or by realizing but presuming that these are harmless demonstrations, major universities and cities have become hotbeds of anti-Semitism. Apparently, accepting donations from foreign actors is not unusual in the era of globalization. The Technion, Israel's most prestigious university, also received a donation from the Chinese billionaire Li Ka-shing to establish a branch in China. But in the Qataris' case, the majority share of donations comes from the Qatar Foundation, a non-profit organization established by the government in 1995 to promote education and science in their country. By accepting donations from this foundation, academic institutions were also forced to make adjustments, such as removing some of the too liberal books from reading lists and signing a cooperation agreement with controversial media outlets like the Qatar-owned Al Jazeera, a Muslim mouthpiece disguised as a media organization that is excessively pro-Hamas and other Palestinian terrorist organizations. This might be the reason why anti-Zionism agendas have intellectualized and rationalized antisemitism on college campuses by dressing up centuries-old Jew hate in modern-day academia with sexy terms like liberation and resistance, and by attempting to rewrite much of the Israeli-Palestinian and Middle East history, or purposely editing out certain parts. This might also be the reason why there's a direct connection between the amount of donations from Qatar and other Persian Gulf countries, and the presence of pro-Palestinian groups that today feature on college campuses, led by Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP. At least according to 2020 findings from the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, where Elie Wiesel once served as honorary president. At some universities, SJP groups organized demonstrations and days of rage on October 8th, just one day after Palestinian terrorists infiltrated Israel and killed more than 1,000 people, mostly Jews, and kidnapped some 240 others. In other words, these anti-Israel and really anti-Jewish displays took place well before Israel began its significant military operations in Gaza. Even Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard, who was among the first to blindsided by these absurdities, admitted that the situation is out of control. She spoke at a Shabbat dinner at the university's Hillel, where, contrary to her hesitant words the week prior, she was much more decisive. After quoting the Bible, Gay openly admitted that, for too long Harvard has done too little to deal with the continuing presence of antisemitism, which has a long and shameful history with us. In recent weeks, however, the current is too strong, and the damage is running uncomfortably deep. Even before a plethora of mostly Jewish business people announced their halt to donations and warned that their companies will not hire university graduates who facilitate violent demonstrations against Israel. Aside from losing financial support, something else is starting to worry these university administrators, as Israeli journalist Sophie Schulman pointed out. At all of their campuses, there's a large presence of Jewish and Israeli lecturers and doctoral students. They are considered among the best minds, especially in science and medicine, but many of them are obviously feeling unsafe. And this is exactly what so many Muslims aspire to engender, that Jews across the world will feel tremendously fearful and intimidated through the vehicle of Israel. Hence why the unspeakable Palestinian attacks on October 7th in Israel were, in actuality, attacks on all Jews across the world. Israeli Jews just happen to be the so-called lowest-hanging fruit. And what makes these attacks so bothersome is that they weren't just political. As many people have pointed out, if the Palestinians just wanted their own state, Hamas wouldn't have pursued this path, and the Palestinian Authority wouldn't have decided to stay quiet rather than condemn these atrocities. In addition to being political, these attacks were also ethnic, racial, religious, and ideological. A combination that makes Nazi Germany anti-Semitism pale in comparison in some ways. The only reason why so many Muslims, with their 50 or so majority Muslim countries, haven't systemically killed 6 million Jews or more is because the Jews now have our own real refuge, the State of Israel. Had these Arab and Muslim majority countries not expelled the vast majority of their Jews leading up to and after Israel's founding in 1948, who knows what they would have done to the more than 1 million Jews living there. Fortunately, many of these Jews immigrated to Israel, where they, together with the other Jews in Israel, created an intelligence agency called the Mossad. Let's remember, it's this very Mossad that has departments which look after Jews and Jewish communities across the world. Just a few days ago, the Mossad helped thwart an attack against Jews in Brazil. I wish more Jews across the world, as well as our non-Jewish family and friends, would realize just how critical the State of Israel is to their safety and survival, wherever they are on this planet, because there are a billion Muslims everywhere. Sure, not every Muslim hates Jews and wants to kill us, but even a small percentage of a big number isn't fear-mongering. It's math.